attending. We are very happy to host our very first Caffeine Club, is this called. So that's a little recurring event that we're doing to just shed some light on new hot topics and topics that are relevant to our work, to give you a little mental and physical boost, and give you new ways to look at your challenges from a new angle. So today we are getting an introduction into behavioral science from Ellie and Caffeine from the Ogilvy Center for Behavioral Science. They do very exciting work. I'll just keep it brief. Everyone, coffee and donuts. Please ask questions and enjoy.
And people, you can come in, Michelle. And stuff.
You guys can come on in. There's lots of room in the front here if you want to come and sit. There, you can fill in back here so everyone can see. Hey guys, girls, ladies, everyone. My name's Ellie. It's Colleen. So first things first, I am not a behavioral scientist. And I'm sure there's someone in this room that knows more about behavioral science than I do. I definitely, I hope this can be a conversation. What I have been doing here for the last 6 months or so, and then Colleen joined us about a month ago from Columbia University where she's doing her master's, is basically we've been setting up this new practice called the Ogilvy Center for Behavioral Science. And what it's meant to do is to be a resource to work with all parts of Ogilvy as in a bit of a consultative practice where we can help on all sorts of client briefs from a behavioral science perspective. What I actually do, and I sit in OgilvyRed, is I do design strategy. And that's like basically anything from experience design, and that might be like how many IBMers know experience design as like UX and like user flows and journeys and things like that, through to like service design, which is like personas and journeys and stuff, all the way through to like business design and organizational design of humans and the way that people work and interact. So with the center, when it launched back in January, it launched centered around Chris Graves, who some of you guys may know, brilliant fellow who has been running OPR globally for a lot of years, and he spent about 7 or 8 years pulling together the most common cognitive biases that comes up in communications practice. So things that you guys might have heard of, like decision fatigue or temporal discounting, or self-efficacy and agency, like those concepts that maybe have popped up somewhere in pop culture or pop science, or maybe in some of your research that you guys have done on different briefs. He spent 7 or 8 years building this big index of all of these biases and mapping them to different practices, different parts of our business, and the ways that our categories of our clients' business. So, for example, how temporal discounting might come into play in a communications brief in health and wellness, or in technology, or in, consumer packaged goods. So basically he spent all this years putting this together, and we've launched a practice around it about 6 months ago, and I've spent about 6 months figuring out, okay, well, what does our practice do, and how do we actually make behavioral science applicable to our briefs in marketing and technology, and advertising and PR and social and all these different parts of Ogilvy, and how does it actually work into our day-to-day, and how can it actually be helpful? So if there's anything that I'm trying to answer in this little session, firstly, I hope that you guys walk out thinking, okay, cool, I know one way that I could use behavioral science in something that I'm doing today, and maybe knowing just a little bit more about what behavioral science is. So I will start with, can anyone tell me like one of the most shocking things that happened in news in the last year, like the last 365 days? What was the most shocking thing that happened? Oh my God, Trump won. Yeah, crazy. What was maybe the second most shocking? It was before that. It was also kind of similar vibes, like Brexit. No one saw that coming. And one of the reasons that no one saw it coming was because a lot of the pollsters were basing a lot of their data purely on demographics. And while that target was really bang on, and in all honesty, that was like hit the nail on the head, it also missed this really larger audience that they had the opportunity to talk to, and that audience was based on worldview. Now, when we talk about demographics versus worldview and mindset, there's a lot of different ways that we can cut in. People might be like, oh, this sounds like psychographics and things like that. But really, it's a couple different elements of the way that people think about themselves versus the world, and versus how the world thinks of them. So if we think about the way that our audience or our customers or our clients' customers think of themselves versus the world, it's kind of like this is me and this is the world. And how in demographics we've kind of painted pictures of people. If you think of the way that we do personas and things like that, it's kind of like, how does the world think of you? Oh, well, you're a millennial, or you're based in New York, or you drive this kind of car. And what we're trying to do with applying behavioral science to communications is understanding these worldview differences, because we've really found, and Trump and Brexit are two very clear cases of this, that worldview sometimes often does drive decision making a lot more and drives behavior change a lot more than purely demographics. And demographics are a very important part of the whole puzzle, but if we have, stated behavior, derived behavior, and actual behavior, and we can map those really well. We're all really fairly good at that in our industry now. The thing that we're missing is cognitive insights, understanding what people think, how they feel, in order to be able to perceive how they might act in, let's say, an election. So for example, if we take Phoebe and Rachel, they kind of look like demographic twins, right? Like same age range, maybe same location, perhaps same income level-ish. But they are very different personalities and very different types of people, right? And so they might make a decision very differently, a purchasing decision or a voting decision, things like that. Whereas if we take Cersei Lannister and Stewie, couldn't be more different, right? Like one is like living in medieval magical times and one is living in Rhode Island. I didn't know that. Yeah, Stewie's in Rhode Island. But kind of their goal is to take over the world and be evil. So we can see and honestly, like those are funny illustrations, but honestly, if you think about it, think about you and yourself and maybe a friend who has a very similar, place in life that you would be painted in a similar demographic box, but you guys argue every time you get together about politics or about something, or you have a very different sense of style. These are the types of things that we're starting to tap into. Any questions so far? I'm going to talk about how we tap into those things now. Yeah. Cool. So basically, there's a couple different tools that we've put together to start to understand to start to build these cognitive insights into our briefs for communications and into our strategy. One is called the cultural cognition grid. And these are tools, not tools developed by Ogilvy. These have been developed and designed by scientists, by behavioral scientists over the past decade or so, many of whom have written some really good books that if you're really interested in it, you can take a look at these. Daniel Kahneman is like the first one that everyone knows. Everyone knows Nudge, or Jonathan Haidt, The Righteous Mind. Like those are the most popular ones. But basically, all the behavioral scientists have been putting together tools to start to map these different worldviews and these different mindsets for some time. And one of them, the very first one the first step in our process as Ogilvy Center for Behavioral Science, is the cultural cognition grid. And what we have is a y-axis. At the top, we've got hierarchical, and at the bottom, we've got egalitarian. And an x-axis, on the left, we've got individualist, and on the right, we've got communitarian. And realistically, apparently, every single one of us can plot somewhere on this grid. Realistically, probably it's more of a spider graph where there's like different parts of you are a little bit more hierarchical and different parts of you are a little bit more individualist. But the easiest way to illustrate this is, for example, if you are trying to sell green energy to someone in the communitarian egalitarian quadrant. So down here, we've got a picture of like humans, and they're all connected by a circle, and everyone's equal and everyone's connected. Community and equal. They're the easiest ones to sell green energy to, right? Like it's like save our planet, let's be friends, and let's all do this together, and together we can get this done, right? Easy. What about hierarchical and individualist? Does anyone have an idea of like how you would position green energy to someone who believes in traditionalism, hierarchy, everyone has a place in the world, and everyone should abide by order and tradition, and there's a specific order of things that should happen in?
We all have a role to play, and if we don't do that, we fall apart.
Maybe I like that. We all have a role to play. It plays into the like each person is in their own position. It also is a little bit community oriented, so it might be like maybe that's individualist, that's on the high side of individualist, but it's a little bit towards communitarian, because if it all falls apart together, right? So that'd be cool. Like that'd be like right about here. You can't see, but I'm in between like communitarian and individualist. That'd actually be up there. Anyone else?
Energy independence can make you better off than other countries and other individuals.
Yeah, cool. That's pretty much like exactly where I'd go. I'd say something like get off the grid. Like if you could say something like if you get off the grid and you'll be better off, like you'll be paying less in energy. You'll be paying less in energy bills, things like that. So step one, basically, we would map audiences. We do I'll get into how the center actually does this later in terms of like data and surveys and working with partners, WPP partners like Kantar. But step one would be finding clusters of your clients' audiences according to the cultural cognition grid. And then step two, as we know, is your worldview is only one really important side of it. We see like three very important aspects. You've got worldview, we've got personality, and we've got biases. So with all three of those together, we think that that's sort of like a composite persona. It's a cognitive persona and how we would understand someone. So the next step would be understanding their personality insights. And IBM, I feel like this is like a largely IBM group. Am I correct in assuming that? Yes? Okay, so Watson personality insights, you guys know more about it than I do. But that's step two, is we would be running personality insights on those clusters against that we had found in the cultural cognition grid and say, okay, well, how do they rank? Is there a lot of commonalities of people ranking really low on openness and high on conscientiousness and low on extroversion and low on agreeableness and high on neuroticism? I don't know, I just made that up. But you can come up and read what each of these are, and it's Big Five Ocean for those of you guys who know the science behind it. And if you want to take the personality test yourselves, we loaded up just like a free version of doing it yourselves. And there's also, as you know, you can go into the IBM Personality Insights, Watson Personality Insights page and look at it for Oprah or for anyone else. If you guys need that link, let me know, but I feel like you know that. So basically, we would then find personalities, commonalities within any of the clusters on our grid, and what we would create is called a cognitive persona. So a cognitive persona is really understanding that think and feel piece, and we would add it to all of our wonderful and accurate and detailed and deep, stated derived and actual behavior insights that we have in our current practices. And then lastly, and this is the one that I started out talking about with Chris and his story of building, like taking the top 50 most common cognitive biases and making them actually accessible against our category. A wonderful designer, actually a designer at Slack, if anyone's interested, created this cognitive bias codex. And basically, it takes all these cognitive biases that our wonderful community of behavioral scientists have been mapping for so many years and started to organize them, but it's still really, really inaccessible. It's still really hard to understand, well, what does availability bias actually mean to a health and wellness brief? And what does temporal discounting actually mean to, a health and wellness brief? I don't know. So we decided to make an app for it. And the app is called Amos. Actually, I have it loaded up here, and I'll give you guys a quick demo. And this app is going to be, we're in development right now. We've designed it. We've loaded in the, basically all of the intersections where a cognitive bias might be either working for or against our client in different categories. And everyone with an Ogilvy ID is going to be able to access this, and you'll get to use any of these cognitive insights in your briefs. So basically, step one is, what category are we in? Let's say we're in a health and wellness brief. We have a health and wellness client, and we're trying to, it's a campaign, let's say it's Aetna, and it's a campaign for, they do like a lot of anti-smoking. So let's say it's prevention. So preventative and detection. So anti-smoking is like prevention, right? What are the cognitive biases that might be at play oops, sorry, of course this happens right on the demo, of course. As I probably should have mentioned, it's still in development. So we are building it right now. Bear with me, everyone. Does anyone have any questions while I pull this up? I can multitask. No. It didn't actually work. Okay. Up and running. Okay. So, for example, Aetna anti-smoking campaign. We can explore, okay, well, what's choice architecture? AMOS, our handy-dandy applied motivational operating system, will tell us what choice architecture is, a generic or a general example, and then what choice architecture actually means for prevention and detection. We can pick another one. We could do like availability bias. Okay, what does it mean? Here's an example of it. You can read more and get more detailed. And then what it actually means to that specific category. If you wanted to learn more about any given bias, not just in terms of a specific brief, you can go to the bias page and learn more about availability bias in relation to any of our clients' major categories. So sales and marketing, financial, management, employees and organization, politics, issues and crises. And this content, this is the content that Chris has been putting together for the last like 7 or 8 years in partnership with the Rockefeller Foundation. But also he only put together like a third of it, and the rest of it's been filled in by Colleen here. It's been part of her internship, so she's been doing all this research to figure out, well, what these biases actually mean, so she can tell you a little bit more about them. Does anyone have any questions so far? I'm talking a lot. Cool. Yeah?
So I guess once the app is done, is this something that's going to be integrated into the actual planning process? Or you put like this is our plan or this is the industry we're targeting? And
I think it can,
think about?
not on like an Ogilvy worldwide level, but on an individual level, if it was something where you wanted to include cognitive or behavioral science in your, let's say, for example, in a do brief, it might be added as a line in a do brief. That's something that we've been talking about with the strategy department. But also, I think that it's a little bit of kind of like, it's an educational tool. You can use it to help inform your own research and how to better research, to do deeper research in different areas for your clients and in a new area, which is exactly what Performance Accelerator is about. But also it can be a way for different parts of Ogilvy to collaborate. So for example, because the center is going to be part of RED, it's a way for, IBM team and RED to collaborate on a brief, or if you wanted, and that's like if you wanted to get deeper than just surface level. So to me, AMOS is kind of like the tease of it. It's sort of like, here's these biases, here you can understand them on this kind of like this level, and you have to you still have to like read this and be like, okay, well, what is availability bias? What does that actually mean for my brief? How can I actually apply that to a do brief or to this specific piece of client's needs? But if you wanted to get like deeper and do like this kind of stuff where we do like, worldview mapping, personality insights, and then basically what you would do as next step in the center is to say, okay, well, now we have these cognitive personas, and what does availability bias mean to persona 1 versus persona 2? Because these biases, while they're universal, they're going to mean very different things. Like the way that you would activate temporal discounting, the idea of thinking of your future self, and you never really, for example, if you had a smoking campaign and you wanted to get people to quit smoking, you would think about what temporal discounting means. It's like you don't think about your future self. So how can we get people to actually consider their future selves? Well, someone who's a hierarchical individualist might think of their future self very differently than communitarian egalitarian, right? And so it's when you start to mix these different pieces, the biases with the worldview and the personality, that you get some really interesting insights and creative fuel. Yeah?
On that line of thought, to me, all this seems mostly useful for a creative level, creating copy, creating messaging, shaping to a certain type of target. So wouldn't the next step here be, okay, given this certain bias, given this certain cognitive segment, what is the messaging we can put in front of said target in order to induce action?
Totally. So there's two different routes that we take as basically like action paths out of these insights, and it depends on what kind of brief it is. It depends on what kind of client it is, and it depends on what kind of strategist you are. But we see it as messaging and sorry, what is it called? There's messaging and it's not interference. Intervention. Thank you. Yeah. So messaging and intervention. And intervention is kind of like product and service design. So we have some cool case studies here. So for example, one of our, I don't think it's one that's on the wall, but one of our case studies is there was outbreaks of E. coli in a factory, and the company was like, we need to get people to wash their hands, so what are we going to do? The insight was that that if there was an obvious thing that helped them understand like when it was clean, it would make it clearer. And so basically, they started, when people come into work, when they stamped in, they would get a stamp on their wrist, and once they washed their hands, or on their back of their hand, once they washed their hands, it was gone, and then E. coli was reduced in like an incredible amount. So that's an interventionist. That's like a product or a service or an experience design thing. But in KFC in Australia, they use the scarcity bias to say maximum of, our chips are only $1, chips and fries. Our fries are only $1, maximum of 4 per piece. Scarcity bias to say was like, you can only have 4, and increase 56% in total sales. So that's a messaging one. Or Diageo tried a bunch of different messaging. They noticed that people were ordering more beer and wine in bars, and they wanted to push spirits, obviously, because they're Diageo. And so they tried a bunch of different biases, like social norm, messenger, drink images, award, like basically a bunch of different biases in their actual menu design. And the one that won out was bartender's choice, which is taking the messenger of the bartender along with an image of a drink, so visual. So it was nudge mixology because it was a mix of different ones. So 2 different cases. One is narrative, where it's like basically crafting briefs for communications and marketing, and one is interventionist, which is like crafting product and service design. So that might be like changing packaging, changing experience, changing store design, kind of 2 routes. And Ogilvy Change, if anyone's familiar with Ogilvy Change or Rory Sutherland, they've been doing mostly like interventionist behavioral economics for the last 3 to 5 years in London. And we're partnering with them on a lot of stuff. Any other kind of questions right now? Yeah.
Like a lot of times we get briefs on things like Friday, and like we're targeting developers, for example. It's like, how would we really start without like boxing them in, which is like what we're not supposed to do? Like, how is it?
It's not that you're not supposed to do it. It's just one part of a larger puzzle.
Yeah. Well, so how would we? Or so have you like taken a bunch of different careers and like plotted them on the cultural cognition grid, or like how would we even start to like figure out what is the current
To use these tools?
Yeah.
Well, I think that step 1, the most accessible way to start is through biases, and you could take with understanding demographics and where they currently are based on, stated, derived, and actual behavior, which is what our current insights give us, quant and qual in a lot of ways. You can take any of the information of these biases, and you can think about how it might apply to your current audiences. This practice we're crafting it right now, and this part here we're going to be, the data will be basically all of the survey respondents will come through a partnership with Kantar. So it'll be a mix of either it would be like primary research where Kantar sets out a new survey that plots survey respondents on the cultural cognition grid, or taking existing surveys panels and layering a new way of looking at their answers to understand where they sit on the grid. So there can be basically primary or secondary research. So it just depends on what the brief is. But if you wanted to do anything in the like cultural cognition grid and using personality insights level, I think it'd be in partnership. Like it'd be a partnership with the center, which is like just launching and open to partnering on client briefs. Like we're taking new business right now to work with lots of different parts of Ogilvy. So if that was something that you thought would be like a really interesting brief, email me. I'll send it to the right person. But right now, everyone is Amos. That's what we wanted to do, something that like would make it available to everyone first and foremost, and that's what Amos is going to be. It's going to launch in September. Okay. So, Colleen, if you want to chat, so I thought it'd be kind of cool to look at like one bias. In a little bit more depth to understand what a cognitive bias is, and like watch a video that shows an example of it in communications so you can see it like activated.
The Mahakumbh Mela, India, 2013, the largest religious festival on the planet. Over 100 million people come here to pray together, live together, and eat together. Lifebuoy soap saw this as the perfect opportunity to convey an important message. Always wash your hands with soap before you eat. Our medium? The roti or Indian bread. Served with almost every Indian meal. And the only way to eat it is with your hands. We created a heat stamp capable of leaving a simple message on a roti. Did you wash your hands with Lifebuoy? And over 30 days, a team of 100 people stood in 100 kitchens, stamping over 2.5 million fresh rotis, helping us to reach out to over 5 million visitors at the Mahakumbh Mela.
So by using availability bias in an interventionist approach and messaging, it would, obviously, hopefully lots of people remember to start washing their hands more. There's lots of different case studies that we have. We have a deck if you guys want to read more in depth about it. We have, I have a PDF that I can send out with more case studies that show how it's important or available for us as a tool here. Thanks for listening. Talked through a lot. Do you guys have any other questions or thoughts? You're more than welcome to come and use Amos. I can load it up on one of these computers as well so that more than one person can click through. I hope that was interesting. Thanks, guys.